Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm the president and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust Museum, and it's such a pleasure to welcome you all here to tonight's program, A Story of Resilience, Cherokee History, Culture, and the Trail of Tears. I'd like to start this evening by thanking our community partners for this program, Dallas After School, Equality Texas, Green Hill School, Remembering Black Dallas, and Southwest Jewish Congress. And I'd also like to give a special welcome to our museum members, our board members, Generations members, and volunteers. Thank you all for joining us and for all you do to support us. We couldn't do work like this without you. Thank you. And I'd love to encourage you to consider becoming a volunteer or becoming a member if you're not already one of those. We need your help to do this important work and would love to have you join our family. This evening, we are very pleased to welcome Educator Kaylee Sixkiller, who has spent the last few years sharing Cherokee culture and history with the goal of celebrating the Cherokee people and their accomplishments. Each November marks Native American Heritage Month, when we all join in paying tribute to the rich ancestry and traditions of the first Americans. I hope you will return during normal business hours to visit our Pivot to America wing, where we emphasize crucial moments in American Indian history and share Native upstanders that fought to ensure that the ideals embodied by our country apply to all. It's an ongoing struggle. Our hope is that all who visit our museum think about their responsibility to stand up against prejudice, hatred, and indifference, which is needed now more than ever. So as usual, we will have time after Kaylee's conversation for Q&A. So if you have questions, please raise your hand and our volunteers will come by with note cards. Please write your question out and we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as possible. And if you're joining us virtually, please type your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to those too. Please also silence your cell phones and electronic devices so that we all may listen to Kaylee's presentation without disruption. And now, it's my pleasure to invite Kaylee Sixkiller to the stage.
OCO, welcome. My name is Kaylee Sixkiller. I'm the daughter of Shannon and Aaron Sixkiller and the granddaughter of JL and Sharon Sixkiller of Tulsa. I want to thank you first and foremost for coming out here and giving me this opportunity to talk about Cherokee culture and history and the resilience of this amazing group of people. And that introduction was your first introduction to a little bit of Cherokee culture. See, within Cherokee society, it's not just who you are, it's also your family. And so it is important to introduce not just yourself, but also identify the family that you come from. It also helps, there's a lot of Sixkillers in northeastern Oklahoma, and it helps identify which group I'm a part of. So a little bit about me. My mom remarried when I was 5 years old, and I was adopted into a Cherokee family. So my mother's a very proud Texas woman, and my dad is a very proud Okie. My dad's family still lives in the Cherokee Nation. When my dad was growing up, they lived on the Muskogee Creek side, but my grandparents did make it back over that borderline and move to the right side of Tulsa. And so we do still visit the nation every now and then we have a cabin, very generous term, on Tenkiller, so near Tahlequah. And so I am very lucky that I have the opportunity to go back to the nation at least a couple times a year and connect with the people. And then to go ahead and get it out of the way, because I always get asked questions about it, where does our last name come from? So according to family legend, we, back in the early 1800s, there was a battle with the Muskogee Creek, and my ancestor killed 6 people, as the name suggests. And when he got back, he was known as Sixkiller or the Sixkiller. And as his sons are interacting more with European traders, They are being asked a family name, which is not really something that the Cherokee had. We had a clan system, still have a clan system. And so as they're interacting, they're like, well, our dad's name is Sixkiller, so I guess we'll go with that. And that's how you end up with not being able to throw a rock in northeastern Oklahoma without hitting one of us. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into this. Number one, the event where the southeastern American Indian tribes were forcibly removed from their ancestral homeland to present-day Oklahoma is generally referred to as the Trail of Tears. And don't freak out, it's a perfectly acceptable term for you to use. But within the nation, we tend to use the term the removal. It's how you'll end up with events like Remember the Removal Bike Ride, which is a bike ride that commemorates the journey made in 1838. And so as I'm moving forward, sometimes I'll use Trail of Tears, sometimes I use removal. I just want to make sure y'all know they mean the same thing. Secondly, I am just one person from one Cherokee family who's just Cherokee Nation. I do not speak for all Cherokee Nation citizens. I do not speak for all Cherokees. I don't speak for all American Indians. All I can speak to is myself and my family's history and the stories I've heard, and then what I've learned as a historian. So all that to say, take what I say with a grain of salt. Someone else out there is going to disagree with me, I promise. And then third is, what do you call us, right? What's the good catch-all term for the people that were here before colonization? We've got American Indian, you've got Native American, Indian, indigenous person. Up in Canada, they use First Nations. What should you use? And I think there is some need for a catch-all term. Generally in academic circles today, the accepted term is American Indian. When I was growing up, it was Native American. My dad was growing up, it was Indian. So that's going to change with the times. However, my personal philosophy with this is to ask someone their tribe. And that recognizes that person's unique history, culture, their language, and it honors the traditions of their ancestors in a very beautiful way. So if you know a person's tribe, refer to them as their tribe. But if you need something to refer to all of us as the non-homogeneous unit that we are, you can use American Indian, and I think you'll be safe. But like I said earlier, someone will disagree with you somewhere. So today we're going to talk about who are the Cherokee, because that seems like a straightforward answer, but it's really not. And then we'll get into a little bit of Cherokee history, some of the events around the removal, and then what we did after to continue to be a strong people. Then we'll get into some high points of Cherokee culture, as well as some current issues facing the nation today. And these are mainly things that have been in the headlines recently that I get asked about a lot, so I feel like needs to go ahead and be stated just so y'all have an answer. So this region, this is kind of an older map, but it does have an arrow pointing to roughly the modern day borders of the Cherokee Nation. So we're in northeastern Oklahoma. You can see there are multiple tribes that are interacting with each other, that share borders with each other, that used to have a lot more land than they do now. And that'll kind of play a part in some of the things we talk about in the future. But I wanted to give y'all a visual representation when I talk about the Cherokee Nation as it exists in Oklahoma. This is the area of land we're talking about. So who are the Cherokee? There are 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes. I'm not going to get into a debate about federally versus state versus non-recognized because it's a very complicated topic, but there are 3 federally recognized tribes. The first is the Cherokee Nation. Second is the United Kiowa Band of Cherokee Indians, and third is the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Now, the Cherokee Nation is headquartered in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and these are the descendants of Cherokee who were forcibly removed in 1838 on the removal. Cherokee Nation, when looking at citizenship, does not count blood quantum as a determining factor in enrollment. And that does bring us to the question of what is blood quantum. So blood quantum was a system that was used during the allotment period. And allotment was a time when native lands that were held in trust were then split between native citizens. And the idea of this was effectively to take native land, because somehow when allotment happened, it's not like they looked at the number of citizens and divvied it up equally. It was just they decided you get this amount of land, and then magically there was some left over for white people. And so blood quantum got used at that point to determine who qualified for that allotted land. It's basically, how Indian are you? And it's really interesting because unlike most groups in the United States that fell under the one-drop rule, where all you had to have was one drop of a minority to be counted in that group, Indians had to prove that they had a certain amount to be considered Indian. And that's effectively what blood quantum is. Now, this is an issue that splits tribes today. Some tribes, like the Cherokee Nation, think of it as a colonial effort to disrupt culture and to take people away from the tribe and to break those connections that had existed for centuries. And that's why the Cherokee Nation doesn't use blood quantum to determine citizenship. Other tribes, however, will use blood quantum as a means of preserving that culture and preserving that heritage and guaranteeing that the people who have citizenship are American Indian enough in that perspective. But Cherokee Nation, like I said, does not count blood quantum. However, when we move on to the UKB, or United Kiowa Band, they do count blood quantum as part of their citizenship. Now, the UKB are also headquartered in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, so we have a very small town with two different tribal governments existing there. You also have a university, so you'll sometimes hear Cherokee refer to it as a very policed town, since you have so many different police forces. Now, the UKB, per their website, say that they are the descendants of Cherokee who came to Oklahoma before the Trail of Tears, so the old settlers. I was recently at a professional development where a Cherokee was making some snide comments about this, so that was when I became aware that apparently that's a controversial take by the UKB, but I'm going to go with what they say on their website out of respect for their identity. And they require a 1/4 blood quantum to be enrolled. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians are headquartered in Cherokee, North Carolina, and they are descended of Cherokee who were able to remain in the East and avoid removal, typically by hiding in caves. They were able to maintain a community there and eventually get federal recognition, and they do also require a blood quantum, though less than the UKB, of 1/16. So starting into some Cherokee history, the first interactions with Europeans occur in around 1540, and it was with Spanish conquistadors. And as time goes on, those interactions increase, and so by the 1720s, we start to see treaties being made with the British government. As more European settlers are coming into North America and onto Cherokee land, those interactions are going to increase as well. Cherokee are going to be trading with them. There's an economic benefit there, but there's also going to start being some tension because the white people keep taking the land. And so we have events as we get into the 1700s where there are battles and rebellions by the Cherokee against the European settlers coming onto their land, very famously Dragging Canoe leading a rebellion against them as well, right before the American Revolution. Now, during the American Revolution, the Cherokee are going to side with the British. They're taking the attitude of, hey, those British made that proclamation line of 1763. They said that, there was a certain line that the European settlers couldn't cross. And so the Cherokee felt like the British might be able to preserve their land a little bit better. Not a good move on the Cherokee part, obviously. We have hindsight's 2020. And the Cherokee thought that too, because by the War of 1812, often called the Second American Revolution, the Cherokee side with the Americans in that one. Partially going to be because they saw what happened last time, but also because at the time the Cherokee were engaged in a war with the Muskogee Creek, and the Creek had sided with the British. So it's kind of an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation. Going into the 1820s, a revolution happens in the Cherokee Nation, and that is in the form of Sequoyah creating the Cherokee syllabary. Now, the Cherokee had been interacting with American settlers. They knew about their ways. They knew they had books. Many Cherokees were sending their children to schools founded by missionaries where they're learning to read in English. And so Sequoyah felt that it was important for the Cherokee people to have their own written language. And so after many attempts, he is successful. And from that moment, Cherokee literacy skyrockets. I'm told if you speak Cherokee natively, it's very easy to learn how to read it. I do not have that luxury, and so it is very difficult for me. But the Cherokees start using this language all the time. They create a newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, which is still published by the nation today. They write books in Cherokee. They translate the Bible into Cherokee. They are using this language. And at the same time that this great cultural revolution is happening for the Cherokee, gold is found near Dahlonega, Georgia. And concurrent with that, state governments are starting to really want to get rid of their Indians. And this prompts the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which was a devastating law for the southeastern tribes. And it effectively allowed the President of the United States to make treaties to sell lands held by American Indian tribes in the Southeast in exchange for lands west of the Mississippi. Now, the Cherokee are going to respond to this not through your typical warfare. They are going to say, we are going to use the court system. And so the first case they take is Cherokee Nation v. Georgia. This doesn't really go anywhere because Chief Justice John Marshall decides that it's not in the court's jurisdiction to make a decision on it. And so the Cherokee Nation goes back and they decide to throw their support behind Samuel Worcester and Worcester v. Georgia. Now, Samuel Worcester was a missionary who worked with the Cherokee, lived with the Cherokee. And at the time, the state of Georgia had passed a law that if you were a white person going on to Indian land, you had to have a pass to do so from the state. And Samuel Worcester refused to get that pass, and so he's arrested and convicted. He appeals this to the Supreme Court, and it turns into Worcester v. Georgia, which is, personal opinion, the most important ruling in regards to tribal law, and I think plenty of people would agree with me on that. And from Worcester v. Georgia, Chief Justice John Marshall is going to decide that the state of Georgia has no right to impose its laws on the Cherokee Nation, and that they can't tell people they have to have a pass to go on Cherokee lands because it's Cherokee land. They get to decide who's on their land or not. And this moment is really important. When I teach this to students, I always really hone in on this because it's a moment in U.S. history where the white guy's not the bad guy, right? Here's the Supreme Court siding with American Indians and siding with tribal sovereignty. And that's super important for, I think, students to hear and for general people to hear as well, that it's not just the white people taking Indian land all the time, though that is generally what happens. It's also a moment where the Supreme Court says, no, we're going to do right by these people. Unfortunately, President Jackson was in office, and he is, well, his quote's attributed to him. There's quite a bit of debate about did he say it or did someone else say it or how did he say it. But it's been written down that he said, John Marshall has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Which, as we understand the Supreme Court, they can't enforce laws, they just decide if they're constitutional. And so even though we have this great moment in Worcester v. Georgia where tribal sovereignty is, they're backing it, the Army and the President is choosing to ignore that. And so the push continues to move the Cherokee out of their land. Now at this point, the Cherokee Nation is starting to be split. We have the Treaty Party, led primarily by Major Ridge, who himself was a prominent Cherokee. He was wealthy, he was very respected for the military service he did during the War of 1812, but he was not at this point part of the government. Now, that's an important thing, I want you to put a pin in that. The other side, we have the Ross supporters, and Principal Chief John Ross was in power at the time, and they felt that it was important to stay in Cherokee land and continue to fight and to hold on to this land that had been their ancestors. Now in 1835, That treaty party is going to go to D.C. and they're going to sign the Treaty of New Eshota. And this sold Cherokee land in the east in exchange for land in Indian Territory west of the Mississippi. Now the Cherokee are going to come back on that and say, hey, our government didn't sign that. And they're going to put forth a petition to basically tell the U.S. government, we don't support this. We didn't agree to this. We have a government, we have a system that does it, and they're not the ones who signed it. And the U.S. government takes the attitude of Cherokee's a Cherokee. Some Cherokee signed it, so it counts. And so with this treaty, now the Cherokee are forced to move from their homeland. And that is what happens in the winter of 1838-1839. U.S. troops are going to forcibly round up Cherokees from their homes, place them in relocation camps. When they get enough of a group gathered, they will march them, soldiers, alongside from Georgia to Oklahoma. Now, no one at the time would have known and possibly wouldn't have cared that this was one of the worst winters on record, but it was, and that was a contributing factor to the number of Cherokee that died on the removal. 4,000 Cherokee died during this period. And I'll add a little bit of levity here and tell you, the first time I talked to students about the Trail of Tears, I had a student gasp audibly when I got to this part, and they looked at me and their eyes were just huge. And they go, Miss, did your family survive? And of course, I'm sitting there like, well, my dad wouldn't be here if they didn't. But that was an interesting moment for me because I kind of just took for granted that if I'm here telling you about it, they did. But it was this amazing moment of seeing student empathy, which I'll say as a teacher doesn't happen very often anymore. But once the Cherokee are in Indian Territory, they rebuild. Their government sets up again, they get the Cherokee Phoenix going, and they establish towns and churches and communities and schools, and they make do with the situation that they've got, and they're determined to flourish. And as they're trying to flourish, the American Civil War occurs, which was detrimental to many people flourishing during that period. And during the Civil War, the Cherokee Nation and other Indian nations in Oklahoma are in an interesting position because they are a border area. They're between Confederate Texas and Kansas in the north. And so both governments really want the American Indians on their side because that's a nice buffer between citizens that they care about. And so the U.S. government is trying to get the Cherokees on their side. The Confederate government is trying to get Cherokees on their side. And the Cherokee Nation finds itself once again split. You have some Cherokee who look at that and go, the federal government kicked us out of our home like 30 years ago. What do you mean we're going to side with them? Same hand, you've got some Cherokee who are looking at it and saying, the state of Georgia was a key player in that getting kicked out of our home, so why would we side with them? You also have to consider that at this point in time, the Cherokee did practice slavery with African slaves. And so you have some wealthy Cherokee who are attempting to preserve that institution of slavery. The Cherokee are going to at first side with the Confederacy, though many Cherokee are going to fight for the Union initially. And then about halfway through the war, John Ross, who is still principal chief, is going to decide that they need to switch sides. And so he goes to Washington, makes peace, and at that point, the Cherokee Nation banned slavery, and the Cherokee freedmen as a community begin. And currently, the Cherokee freedmen have citizenship, though that is a fairly recent development. There were many years where they did not. Time goes on, we enter into some new phases. The federal government's no longer really working hard at removing American Indians from their land. Now they're trying to just assimilate them. And so we enter this assimilation period, and this brings us to boarding schools in the late 1800s, where indigenous children would be taken from their parents, typically sent to schools very far away from their tribe. They would have their hair cut, which was an incredibly painful thing for most tribes, as hair is a sacred part of the body. It's an extension of your spirit. they'd be forced to wear American-style clothing, and they would be forced to learn English and not be allowed to speak their native language. The result of this was that they were never fully accepted in a white community because they're still American Indian, but now they can't even speak the language of their elders. They can't connect with their community. And so they end up in this weird middle ground where there's a loss of culture, but you can't quite join the new one yet. And then we get to 1907, which is an interesting date for American Indians in Oklahoma. That's when Oklahoma becomes a state. And now we've got even more white people coming in. And this is how we end up with the allotment period, because we need more land for the white people. And you end up in a period where tribal sovereignty is going to be really threatened. Tribal governments aren't going to be allowed to elect their own chiefs. The president of the United States is going to decide that. And so throughout the 20th century, it's really a period of American Indians fighting for their right to decide things for themselves. And by the time we get to the later part of the 20th century, we do just have that. Chiefs can now be elected. Tribes are able to make decisions for themselves for the most part. And we're in a new phase where we've got even more court cases coming out that are reaffirming tribal sovereignty. So it's a very exciting period at this point. Now into a little bit of Cherokee culture. I would be remiss if I didn't start with what I feel is the most important part of culture. That is language. Language is our gateway to people. And the Cherokee Nation is very, very proud of their language, and they have taken many steps in the preservation of the Cherokee language. There's a Cherokee children's TV show. There are YouTube videos put out by the nation to teach Cherokee words. And the nation offers online classes so that people can learn it wherever they are. And that includes asynchronous lessons that are just videos that you can watch at your own discretion, and a textbook that you can download from the nation and completely follow along. And so the nation has done an insane amount to try and preserve the language and make sure that it's accessible for younger generations to learn, even if their grandparents or great-grandparents could no longer speak the language. And then a question I get asked a lot, typically not in a polite way, is about religion and Christianity. And this, I usually am just, the first few times it happened, I was kind of dumbfounded because I just took for granted that everyone knows how many churches there are in northeastern Oklahoma. But the Cherokee are by and large Christian, and I would gather to say a lot of them are Baptist. Starting in the early 19th century, Moravian missionaries, so missionaries from what is now the Czech Republic, came over and set up schools to educate Cherokee children, and in doing so, they are teaching them the Cherokee, or the Christian religion. And that just continued. At the time of the removal, many Cherokee were Christian, and in fact, we have reports from soldiers of them recognizing the hymns that the Cherokee were singing as they walked. Even though they're singing in Cherokee, we all know the tune of Amazing Grace, whether it's in English or not. And so religion, Christianity, is an important part of the Cherokee Nation today. I don't think I've ever been to a national holiday where someone didn't say a prayer at some point. And that continues to this day, though I have seen, especially with younger Cherokees, starting to incorporate a lot of traditional beliefs into that Cherokee as a form of reconnecting with the culture. And of course, despite my own lack of interest in sports, I have to mention stickball. Stickball is a game that's similar to lacrosse. It was played by most of the tribes in the Southeast, and in fact, there were periods where they would play a game of stickball to settle a disagreement rather than go to war. And on our next slide, I do have a video of a stickball game being played that I was lucky enough to happen upon the last time I was in the nation. Another important aspect of Cherokee culture is the crafts that we make, the artwork we make. And primary focus would be on beadwork and pottery, but also basket weaving is very important. And every year at the national holiday, which is held Labor Day weekend, everyone is free to come out to Tahlequah and go. There is a Cherokee Arts and Crafts show that features the work of Cherokee artisans in beadwork and pottery and basket weaving, and features the work of many of the Cherokee national treasures who are national treasures because of that work they do with their craft and preserving that aspect of the culture. And then very exciting for me was in 2022, Horton Records, which is out of Tulsa, released an album of contemporary Cherokee music. Now, a lot of Cherokee music is hymns that have been translated into Cherokee, which is fantastic if you're in the mood. But if you wanted to listen to a rock song, you were probably going to have to listen to it in English. And then Horton Records comes along, and they gathered together Cherokee artists who were across a variety of genres, and they created this album. And there's a rock song on there, there's a country song that is very similar to Hank Williams yodeling. There's a song on there that is reggae, which is very interesting. You have a metal song on there as well. So whatever genre you're into, you can find a Cherokee song to your liking. And I think this is a really, really cool moment for Cherokee history and culture, because we're not only preserving the culture at this point, we are actively continuing it in a modern way, but in a way that still honors that heritage. So here is what stickball looks like. This was at a tournament that was being played there in Tahlequah at the NSU Stadium. And what they're doing is they've got 2 sticks and a ball. I know, surprising. And they are essentially trying to hit the top of that pole. And you can see he's grabbing it, he's throwing it, and they're running around and doing that. Now, traditionally, if you went to the Dilligwa, which is a traditional Cherokee village circa about 1740, you would find a stickball game with a wooden fish at the top, and that's what they're trying to hit. Here, they've obviously just got the poles so that they can kind of set them up and move them when they need to. So the Cherokee government is very similar to the United States government. There are 3 branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. The executive branch is made up of the principal chief, deputy principal chief, and 7 cabinet members. The legislative branch is the tribal council, and this is made up of representatives from the 15 districts within the Cherokee Nation. Think of them kind of like counties, as well as 2 representatives for at-large citizens. An at-large citizen is any Cherokee citizen who does not live within the boundaries of the Cherokee Nation. So you could live on the wrong side of Tulsa and be an at-large citizen. You could live in Texas and be an at-large citizen, or you could be all the way in Germany and be an at-large citizen. Does not matter where. You got 2 tribal council members representing you. And lastly, the judicial branch. This is the Cherokee Supreme Court. These judges are appointed by principal chiefs, and they serve for 10 years. Just an interesting difference. So on to some current issues facing the nation. A question I get often asked about is, was my family in boarding schools? And a quick note on semantics right there. The schools that were set up where American Indian children were forced to be in and taught American ways. In the United States, we usually refer to them as boarding schools. You'll hear the term residential school used for schools in Canada. Just wanted to clear the air on that because sometimes people get confused. My grandparents did not attend a boarding school. A few years back, my grandpa kind of mentioned offhandedly that 2 of his older brothers attended Shaloko, which is in Kay County. The oldest, who attended the school longest, died it was killed in action at Saipan during World War II, so we don't have his memories of his time at Shaloko, whether it was good or bad. He certainly was at a point in time when boarding schools were getting better, but that's an opinion statement, take that as you will. And then the younger brother, he was there for a day, and I couldn't get a good answer out of my grandpa about why that was. Could have been a girlfriend, could have been wanting to play for a different football team, could have been something else, we don't know. The second point I want to make is about the Indian Child Welfare Act, which has been in the news recently because it's being challenged quite a bit by people who want to be able to adopt American Indian children. So the history behind this is that when boarding schools fell out of style as the means of separating indigenous children from their families and culture, the way that this was continued was through very loose means of finding a reason that an indigenous child shouldn't be with their parents anymore and then putting them in a foster family that was white. And the Indian Child Welfare Act was intended to make sure that American Indian children were placed hopefully with someone within their own tribe, but at the very least with another American Indian family, so at least the culture would be respected and there was some guarantee that the child would be raised in acknowledgement of their culture. And this sounds great. There are plenty of cases where this kind of gets sketchy because at the end of the day, we've got to be taking care of the children and doing what's best for them. And so personal opinions on this, however you want to take them, is that the Indian Child Welfare Act is a very important piece of legislation that is needed to ensure that indigenous children are being raised with their culture. However, we've got to take it case by case to make sure that children are being taken care of no matter what. And lastly, probably the most important issue that the tribe is pushing right now is the fulfillment of the Treaty of New Eshota. That's that treaty I mentioned back that sold Cherokee land in the east for land in the west. And part of this treaty is that it guarantees the Cherokee Nation a delegate to the House of Representatives. And this delegate would be non-voting. And I make sure to emphasize that because that's the main argument against it right now is that people are worried Cherokees are suddenly going to get more of a vote than other people. It's not the case. The delegate would function similar to a delegate from Guam or Puerto Rico. But this would ensure that the Cherokee had a voice in the House of Representatives. And at the end of the day, it's part of the treaty. It should be honored. U.S. government doesn't have a good history of that, though. Now, the Cherokee Nation has put forth a candidate for this place in the House of Representatives, and that is Kim Teehee. And she has experience in D.C. She's worked in presidential cabinets. And federal government is still not honoring that treaty, so that is one of the many broken treaties currently in place. One of the interesting things with this, though, is the last time I gave this presentation, I looked up what the state of this was, and it's still not being honored. Don't worry, there's no big change there, but the United Kiowa Band of Cherokee Indians has actually put forth their own delegate, which is a very UKB thing to do. So those are some main issues, and if you really feel passionate about that Seat the Delegate movement that I just talked about, you can go to the Seat the Delegate website and put in your information, and it will send a message to your congressperson letting them know that you want the Cherokee to have a delegate in the House of Representatives. So, go back. Quick, frequently asked questions before we get to our formal questions. And these I put in here because I like to go ahead and say them before someone asks me so I can control my facial expressions. Some of them are put in because you may want to ask it, but you don't want to, feel dumb and you think they're stupid questions, which I know as a teacher I'm supposed to say, there's no stupid questions. There are. Don't lie to yourself. So I've included these here so that you don't have to feel awkward about asking them, and I don't have to feel awkward about worrying about what kind of facial expression I'm making in response to your question. So starting us off, are Cherokee princesses real? No. And I did add sorry there to kind of be nice about it, but Cherokee princesses are not real. Personal opinion, I blame Pocahontas being a Disney princess for that one. I'm sorry if you were told that story growing up. We don't have princesses. It's not a title in our government. We have principal chiefs though. And then how did Cherokee get citizenship? So for the Cherokee Nation, you must prove that you have a direct ancestor on the Dawes Roll. That was the census taken to determine allotment back in the late 1800s. And so if you can prove that you're genealogically connected to someone on the Dawes Roll, then You'll provide all that evidence to the nation. They have a team of genealogists that'll double check it for you. And if you do qualify, then you can get a nice little enrollment card in the mail. Other tribes use different rolls. The UKB uses the Dawes roll as well. The EBCI uses the Baker rolls, which are a similar census taken, but at a different time. And then other nations, it is entirely up to them how they decided and what rules they make. And even though I disagree with some of them, they are entitled to make that decision in the spirit of tribal sovereignty. Do Cherokees live in teepees? Nope, never did. That is a Plains Indian thing. Cherokee were sedentary people. We were farmers, and so our homes were typically made out of clay or straw, and then they would have been built with the seasons in mind. Remember, the Cherokee are in Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina. So a summer home was built with the intention of allowing airflow to keep it as cool as possible. A winter home was built in the round to ensure that heat stayed in. Nowadays, most Cherokee live in your normal 2-bed, 2-bath home that any other American would live in. And the only way you're going to know that it's a Cherokee living there is if they've got like a huge Cherokee flag flying out front to give you a clue. And then, do the Cherokee get along with the other Oklahoma tribes? At the moment, yes. Everyone is pretty united against the current governor of Oklahoma because, long story short, he is challenging tribal sovereignty. That's as far as I'm going to get into that one, but I will say I'm a huge supporter of McGirt v. Oklahoma. And so everyone's pretty much trying to ensure that Governor Stitt does not succeed in his plans. I do understand he's technically a Cherokee, but the Cherokee Phoenix regularly makes articles about how he probably isn't actually a Cherokee and his ancestor lied. So if you want to look that up, you're more than welcome to. Now, the Cherokee tribes, or the Oklahoma tribes, is important to keep in mind that they were in the same general vicinity of each other, at least most of them. We're not going to talk about what's going on in Lawton. But the tribes did have a history of sometimes getting along, but sometimes not. Keep in mind, my last name comes from a battle with the Muskogee Creek, who the Cherokee now share a border with. So there is a history there of sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Right now, like I said, everyone's pretty united, and hopefully that kind of energy can continue because that's how we get things done. So I want to say thank you all for coming out, and thank you for listening, and I'm excited to hear what questions you have for me.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. You're a very entertaining speaker. We like that. So please raise your questions, and our staff will come around and pick them up, and we've already got a few coming in. You've talked a little bit about this, and particularly with the new album with all of these popular songs in Cherokee language, but talk about the importance of the preservation of Cherokee language today and other efforts that are ongoing.
Like I said, I think that language is the gateway to a community and to understanding a people and their history. And so when you have the language being spoken, and not just being spoken by Cherokees, but by other people, you gain a deeper insight into that culture and that people. And by making it more engaging with the music, like the 2022 album, we're encouraging younger Cherokee to engage with the language. And it's not just hymns, and it's not just stuff your elders are saying. It is, your language. It is things that you are saying. It is your identity.
Sometimes prior to an event like this, there's a statement read as a land acknowledgement. Do you have a belief, do you believe these statements are a positive step in our nation recognizing our history?
So I have a different opinion than most people. I think land acknowledgements are, nice thing to make people feel better about the history. I don't see how they really work towards actually acknowledging the history. It's not putting an American Indian Studies class in your school. It's not bringing indigenous language to your schools. It's not, facilitating more programs like this. It's just reading off a statement saying, hey, there used to be people here and we kicked them out. However, I know many, many American Indians who feel like it is an important step and it's a good start to an apology. So certainly don't think that my opinion rings true for all American Indians by any means. And I do see the point of view. I just wasn't really raised to think that that was a good move, personally.
That's fair. That's fair. What do you think about the movement away from Native American names in sports franchises?
This is another one where people might disagree with me.
Yeah.
Again, I feel like we have bigger fish to fry, right? We have the need for preserving culture. We need to bring our culture out there. We need to be seen more. We need better representation in Hollywood. We need to not be like this dead caricature. And while, yes, the sports teams do kind of feed into that, I feel like it just makes people more angry at American Indians than actually doing us any good. But this is another one. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on that one.
Yeah. What other tribes were forced on the removal along with the Cherokees?
So typically when we refer to the Trail of Tears, it is the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee Creek, Seminole. Is that 5? I think that's 5. Pretty sure that's the 5. And they're the 5 civilized tribes. The other tribes that were also forced on removals, famously the Navajo Long Walk occurs towards the end of the Civil War, where they're forced from their homeland into a reservation. The Potawatomi were forced from their homeland in kind of the upper Midwest down into Oklahoma. So when we talk about the 1830s, 1840s, we're talking about Seminole, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee Creek, and Cherokee. But keep in mind, many American Indian tribes also experienced forced removals.
And those 5 were all coming from southeast or eastern states. Mm-hmm. What about, Texas used to have so many tribes, and now there are none. Were they forced into Oklahoma as well? Do you know that history?
Less so. Some of them were. This is a time I'm going to plug the museum real quick. If you go upstairs to the 10 Stages of Genocide, you will see a little bit about the Karankawa here in Texas. So the Texas tribes were forced into other locations, but a lot of the Texas tribes were just simply wiped out.
Yeah, it's horrifying. I remember learning, is Karen, so I usually say Karankawa. Is Karen Kara?
I just say what I read. I have a really bad tendency, and my mother can attest to this, that I would read a lot of words and never hear them spoken out loud. And so I just say them however I wanted. And as a child, when I was contradicted on this, I would just look at my mother and say, well, that's how I say it.
Well, I think, I'm not sure that I'm saying it correctly either, but it is in the 10 Stages of Genocide. And I remember vividly in 5th grade growing up in Austin, learning that they were cannibals, which we explain in the gallery that Stephen F. Austin spread that myth so it would be easier to take their land. Horrifying history. Talk to us a little bit more about the Indian sovereignty and how chiefs and other representatives are elected. You said the Supreme Court only is elected for 10 years. What about the principal chief?
I cannot remember when elections are. I'm sorry. We just had one fairly recently. The Cherokee Phoenix hasn't mentioned an election anytime soon, so I feel like we're in.
Do you think it's a 4-year term for the principal chief?
I'm not going to say. Okay. I can't remember. I can't vote, so.
Not fair to grill you on all of this.
But
right?
I do know the Cherokee Phoenix I mentioned, they always do a huge spread when it comes to election time. They'll do kind of a quick cap on who the people running for principal chief are, who the tribal council members are, so that people can read about them and kind of make that decision and vote that way. But it's an election similar to the United States where Cherokee just vote on who they want as principal chief. Current principal chief, I do know that, is Chuck Hoskins Jr.
Okay, here's a question, a personal question. Where do you teach?
Teach at Cleburne High School right now.
Can you further the significance of the Cherokee Phoenix in the continuation of culture today?
I think it's important in general, but particularly from my experience being in an at-large family, it's our connection to the tribe, right? So we have the Cherokee Phoenix that comes in the mail once a month, and that is how we know what's going on. That's how we know what's going on with elections. Its major cultural events will be documented there, such as the Little Miss and Miss Cherokee pageant, which is both a beauty pageant and also like a cultural ambassador for the Cherokee in the room. I am mad about this year's decision for Miss Cherokee. I watched the whole thing and I was not happy. But I am very happy with the Little Miss Cherokee, I will say that. So Cherokee Phoenix is just really good for connecting people from all over and keeping them up to date with what's going on in the nation.
Great. Do you have any suggestions for 19th century poetry or literature in English translations to connect with Cherokee past?
No.
All right, but we can be looking for that.
I do not personally know, but I spoke at Grand Prairie's American Indian Studies conference this past summer, and there was a speaker there who does specialize in indigenous literature. So if I can find that person's contact information, I can connect you with someone who would know better about that.
Fabulous, fabulous. Do you have any personal or particular moments or stories from your family that highlight the importance of the Cherokee language or culture?
The crowd-appropriate one is is I remember family using OCO or Wado, which is thank you. But I also remember my uncle, I believe it was Christmas, it could have been Thanksgiving, his dogs were running around in my grandparents' den, and he kept shouting at them, Geechli, which is dog. And they responded to that better than their name. So I'm not sure if that's an importance of culture, but that's one of the ways that I certainly experienced the culture growing up.
Yeah. The question is, what were the reasons the U.S. government gave for enacting the removal during winter? Probably no reason at all, right? Just do what we say, or
it's when they had the soldiers available. I would guess. I don't know. It's probably the timing that worked for them, and it's what they decided to do.
Yeah. Is there pushback about the opening of Cherokee language to non-natives?
I haven't experienced it. I haven't seen it anywhere. I think most Cherokee would agree that it's important to preserve our language, whether it's Cherokee speaking it or a non-Cherokee, because someone's speaking it and taking the time to learn it. So my personal opinion on it is it's fantastic if you want to go forth and try it. It's hard. So, I haven't seen any pushback, but I could certainly see some people having a differing opinion on that for sure.
Does the Cherokee Nation directly own the land? So did the allotments hold and they own land? And how does that work? Is it divided among the tribe?
There is so the land was held in trust by the tribe, and then allotment happens and it gets divvied up between tribal members. And now the Cherokee Nation does have land. It's where they operate casinos. It's where they operate hospitals. They have a school, things like that. But most of the Cherokee Nation is just owned by private people.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, I guess last question, but an important question. How can individuals who are not Native Americans support Native languages, culture, and ways of life? And do you have any resource suggestions on how we can all educate ourselves more?
Go to the nation's websites. Cherokee Nation has a very good website. UKB do as well. EBCI has one. Most nations have a website. Some of them are better than others. And you can go on there and see the history and the culture, and they'll talk about different things. When looking at, a question I get a lot is, can I wear beadwork? Absolutely. I've never seen any Native complain about that. Just make sure you're buying from indigenous people. We can't make all our money on casinos, guys. But I think a big thing is just talking about and acknowledging and, when I speak to teachers, I always say incorporate as much American Indian history into your class as possible. I know it's not in the TEKS, but it's there for you to teach to your kids and just give them that little seed that then can maybe grow. I think for other Indigenous people, it's important to wear our beadwork, wear the ribbon shirt, use the language when we can to just make sure people know we're here. And if you're non-native, it's acknowledging that we're here. Like I mentioned earlier, you can always go to the Cherokee National Holiday. It's Labor Day weekend every year in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And there is an intertribal powwow, so you can see different dances of different tribes as well there. And powwows in general are generally open to the public. You'll see some situations where there might be a ceremony that, as a non-Indigenous person, you're not welcome to. Certainly do not film a ceremony. But you can go to these events, and most of the time other Indigenous people are going to be like, hey, come on in, let me tell you about this. I think it's great. So just be interactive, and websites are your first resource.
Fabulous. So I'm proud to let you all know that Kaylee is in the museum speakers bureau. She's speaking to students. She's spoken at our educator conferences, and she's just really a tremendous resource for our community. And we're so grateful that you spoke to us tonight, Kaylee.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. And one last thing before I let you go, I wanted to remind you that on December 3rd, we have our final Funk Family Upstander Speaker Series program of the year. And it's going to be a great program. We'll be hosting Rami Jabara. Rami is a co-founder of the Khalid Jabara Foundation, which facilitates meaningful change in the way communities address and combat hate. His brother was murdered, hate crime, by their next-door neighbor in Oklahoma. And Rami and his sister went on to form this foundation and then were very active in promoting the Jabara Hire No Hate Act that was passed in 2021. So it's going to be an important evening, and we hope to see some of you there. You can go on our website and register. And with that, I say good night. Have a very happy Thanksgiving. Don't think about how we took the land from the indigenous peoples, but think about what you have to be thankful for. Good night.